Good morning, channel friends. Hello. So, jokes aside, we're back to the two bedside tables because every now and then we propose two bedside tables. But why is that? Because you actually start with restyling, with courses in the approach to restyling in general, precisely with bedside tables because they are easily available, often mismatched, but also often saved. Beds sometimes break, wardrobes are too large, whereas bedside tables are always kept and placed in entrances, additionally as support, so they are always very versatile pieces of furniture. The two of them, beautiful, with two perfectly healthy marbles, are going to a beautiful, extremely modern house of a young man. A young man who has placed some particular wallpapers and has furnished the house with really good taste, but he is keen to have two vintage pieces that fit well in an extremely modern home. It is a rectangular house and essential, very minimal but with extremely high-quality finishes and tasteful. We agree that if there weren't a few naturally warm pieces, something would be missing. Therefore, Davide told us to look for two bedside tables with a beautiful shape. He loves marble in any form, but he gave me quite a bit of freedom, only choosing a color. However, we agree that the color is right. So they will need to become perfect for a very modern bedroom, with two very modern lamps above them and facing a very modern wallpaper. Let's start. Unfortunately, a piece of the underlying molding has broken, and we absolutely need to glue it before removing the paint and carrying out all the work. So, Emma vacuums everything inside for me, even here, there is a lot of dust. Then we will use our very strong glue with clamps that will press and immediately fix this beautiful molding. I start by fixing my piece of wood that has warped, using my Mastro Diasha glue, which is a really strong glue. Just be careful because it expands. What does that mean? If the part to be glued is not held firmly, it will expand and not stick, so I place it inside, here. Then, with my clamp, I press and try to reposition it, spreading it with a small spatula to ensure it goes well into the groove to cover the entire part needed. Now I place a piece of cardboard to prevent my edge from being damaged, but it doesn't hold still, and with a good clamp, we proceed. Just hold the cardboard for me, thanks. I place some here too, and I go to this part because it's precisely here that the wood needs to bend, curve, and adhere. Now it is essential to do one thing. Take the paper immediately and remove the excess of glue. Use the small spatula in this way. You can see that it is already starting to foam because it is expanding as it comes into contact with the air, filling the entire wood gap. It obviously adheres very well, so it's important to immediately remove the excess. If you don't do it now, you'll be forced to do it later when it becomes rigid and solid, and it will have expanded. Now, while the small piece is being perfectly reattached to the furniture, I am going to strip the paint from the drawer and the door. Usually, when I work on commission, I always tend to add my personal touch. If someone asks me for help to make a piece of furniture, I want to make that person understand that it's essential to first bring out the essence of that piece, regardless of the home that will host it. Meaning what? Even if we have decided to place these beautiful bedside tables in this modern space, it is important to remember that, while they may match the surroundings, their essence should not be altered. These beautiful bedside tables have this lovely inlay on the doors, drawers, and sides. Now, they are not from a particularly distant period of time. I mean, it's not a piece from the 1800s. They are two bedside tables from the 1900s, but in my opinion, they are almost 100 years old, so they should be respected regardless. I suggested to Davide to strip the paint and bring the central part, the front drawer, back to its natural state, and that's it. We leave the sides as they are. What does that mean? He is a little skeptical. He doesn't believe that we will be able to make them modern even by bringing out these shapes, but I do, because I am sure that the tone of the wood that will emerge with the paint stripper, thus removing this reddish tint from the protective varnish, will be very pleasant. And everything will, of course, be framed by a color that will make it even more modern. So let's always remember that a satisfactory, modern result can be achieved while preserving the lines and nuances of these antique pieces of furniture. How is the paint remover applied? With a brush. And the tip is to massage it until it needs to take effect. I know that we often tend to cover it with some plastic film or otherwise ensure it does its job without massaging. It's okay, but massaging the paint remover with the brush will help you use much less of it and make it work much better. So I apply it. I'm here. I do it on the drawer fronts as well. And in the meantime, I'm already noticing that it works. How do I know it? When our paint stripper starts to dissolve the underlying layer, you can see it begins to liquefy and also starts to take on the color of the underlying part. A few moments have passed and we can see that it is already starting to work, taking effect on the underlying part. So, is it long? No, you shouldn't think of applying the paint stripper and then going out to run errands, because when you return, it will all be dry.
And you will struggle, and with the spatula you will scratch trying to remove it. As it dries, it creates its own layer, its own patina. However, if you remove it while it's still soft after it has taken effect, it will be much, much simpler and easier. Now pay attention, because you will see all the steps with me.
Our bedside table is perfectly glued, and with a cutter, I gently remove this white excess that you see, which is nothing more than the dried Mastro di Ascia glue. Here, even though I pressed very well, a little bit still came out. But it's not a problem. As you can see, look, I remove the excess. Don't be fooled. Even if you notice a white sponge, don't worry. This glue is really strong. And it will glue everything permanently. I also remove the excess glue with a small spatula. I have a slightly rounded edge and I don't want to damage it with the cutter. Look, in just a few moments I remove all the excess. It is essential to do this work well so that there are no residues when we paint. Soon we will also wash with our bar and thoroughly degrease the surface very well. Here I sand it a bit, just because having glued it, I don't want there to be a step in the mullion. Over the years, it might have slightly swollen.
It is important to be very precise when gluing to ensure that defects are not visible once you start painting. This can be achieved using a fine abrasive sponge.
And everything will come out perfect. I know many of you don't believe it, that with Magic Paint no primer is needed. I know many of you don't believe it and would still like to sand the surfaces a little, but there's nothing more wrong. If you sand, you risk damaging the surface. If you sand, the tannin rises. Magic Paint does not produce primers as not needed. The only true method for degreasing the surface is our bar, and many restorers make fun of us. They say that wood should not be washed. I agree. A noble wood, an antique piece of furniture, should not be washed. We're not crazy. We don't go soaking furniture like sponges. Yes, we clean the surface to ensure Magic Paint adheres better, and secondly, as we are putting bedside tables in the bedroom. Did you know that some people put their underwear in here? Emma, would you ever put your underwear in here? Let's clean the inside, sanitize, let's do everything properly, because restyling is also culture for hygiene. So, hot water, baking soda, and ammonia. About a glass of ammonia in 2 liters of hot water and a few tablespoons of baking soda, a soft cloth, and if needed, a small brush to help you degrease well where the features of this beautiful bedside table are. This is the brush, the classic nail brush. Look, with this, I do well here where the leg is, and I clean it well, but I'm not crazy to soak it. I dry it immediately. I don't let the wood absorb the water. This must never happen. But I have to use a small sponge and a soft brush, which I would probably use to clean my nails, so it's not aggressive at all, to purify the surface, because a lot of dirt accumulates here. It's essential to remember that restoration is one thing, restyling is another, but with woods of this type, and yes, this is solid wood, the entire underside is solid wood, this one isn't, but this one is. It's very durable, very beautiful, and must be thoroughly cleaned before being colored. We should never demonize methods because not all paints require the same process. There are paints that need a primer to adhere, and that's fine. But there are paints like MagicPaint where a primer is absolutely unnecessary, and we, with a thoroughly wrung-out cloth, proceed to clean the surface. Here time does not make a difference because we apply very little water to the surface. We are just going to clean and purify it so that it is beautiful, clean, sanitized, but most importantly, ready for MagicPaint to cling. For optimal paint stripping, we shouldn't forget this piece here, not to let the paint remover dry too much on the surface, and the optimal time is no less than 15 minutes, then we check it. You see, some parts are much more transparent, so you can see below, and you notice that our paint stripper no longer has that blue-green color, but is starting to turn brown. What's mean? It means that it has completely dissolved the reddish protective layer that was there and melted it. Now we need a microfiber cloth, some alcohol and very fine steel wool, a spatula, and something to put our paint stripper on once removed. Be careful when doing this task because you must not damage the underlying parts, neither the wood nor the inlays, of course. So we remove everything. As you can see in some areas, it is already noticeable that it is no longer glossy but matte, but only when it is dry will the new color of the wood be visible. Be aware that in some areas the furniture is not completely smooth. In fact, there are hollows because, as we know, old wood is not completely straight. So be careful not to create damage to the underlying wood.
But you must be very, very gentle. I sometimes help myself with slightly older, flexible, worn spatulas because they go much more into the corners and follow the old wood better, meaning the old, non-straight wood. You see, in some places, they remove where the spatula, being too straight, cannot reach. In this way, I strip perfectly, going everywhere, always trying to follow the grain of the wood because it's important not to strip against the grain. Here, I remove as much excess as possible, and now with a very wrung-out cloth. There's no water here. It's a really wrung-out cloth. I remove a little excess. I slightly dry the stripper, and now for a final step.
Last but most important for achieving a perfect surface, alcohol and steel wool. This means that will help us remove the last residues. But watch out. Don't be fooled by the color you see now. This is the color of wet wood. When it dries, it changes completely. So, with alcohol, you clean, purify, and remove the last residues of the stripper, as well as any remaining traces of tone, color, protection, or stain in the corners. In this way, we will have the front part perfectly stripped. Now I am doing the same thing on the other pieces, on 2 drawer fronts and the other door, and soon, when they are dry, I will show them to you in all their beauty. Our bedside tables are nicely dry, ready to be painted. Remember, first of all, pure paint. Do not add water in the first coat, especially do not add water because it covers less and adheres less. So I use a nice fine-tipped brush, I think Emma does too, and we start applying the paint everywhere. If necessary, you must also apply the second coat with pure paint.
This is it will help the paint
to adhere better and cover even better, but especially because it will prevent the lifting of some parts of the furniture. Often you find some parts that are veneered. Using pure paints helps you avoid unpleasant lifting of material. Look here, this is just the first coat, but see how well it has already covered the surface, very velvety. The shapes of this bedside table are truly wonderful. Now let's continue and look at the legs. They are really elegant. When we need to work on the side parts, we can also use a brush like the Elizabeth.
Always use a pointed brush in the corners. For less effort, better coverage. So first I do the corner with the brush, the Elizabeth, in order to remove the entire frame to be much more precise.
Like this. And after that, I take my Elizabeth brush and continue. On the side, I need to cover the inlay because it would otherwise appear too classic and would no longer fit well in the ultramodern essence. The fact that I use pure paint will help cover well without the risk of the inlaid part swelling. It's crucial to know how to handle paints when coloring furniture like this, which has different surfaces. Now for the second coat, you saw how well it dried, very well, and how the first coat is almost total, but the second coat is essential to define the color and cover it best. Always remember one thing. The second coat should not be applied when the first is still wet. But why? Because you will remove the first layer and have less coverage. So, make sure to let it dry thoroughly. If it's winter or raining, it will take longer. Therefore, ensure you are in a warm place if you are in a hurry. Perhaps near a radiator or near a stove. Look at that wonderful coverage. If you have large surfaces, you can also use the crossed brushstroke technique. This will help you cover even better. I'll show you on the side of the bedside table. When you have a side like this, always start with the corners, as you did with the first coat. This way, you ensure that the entire frame is well done and there are no edges where the underlying color is still visible. And then it's important for better coverage to do the crossed brushstroke technique, which is this. First, you go against the grain, so you see, I go against the brushstroke I made in the first coat. This way, I close all the wood pores, ensuring that everything that shouldn't be seen is covered. Then I smooth it out to achieve a beautifully velvety, perfect, and well-covered surface. It helps me be even more thorough in the coverage and ensures there are absolutely no spots where the underlying surface is visible. Now I repeat this on the bedside table and move on to the other one. A phenomenal little trick. When you need to paint the inside of some furniture that still smells, perhaps you haven't washed it with Liberty or sanitized the interior with bleach or ammonia, but you still want to give it a refresh, use the Magic Wall. It has protective inside and it covers wonderfully. I use pepper blue, which I love. I use it in all sorts of ways because in some places this drawer had ink stains. With this trick, the furniture will be completely infused with the scent of the wall, which is jasmine scented, and will no longer have any bad odors. Secondly, I will completely remove the ink stains, and thirdly, the drawers are already protected, so there will be no need to apply the protective coat again. I use the spalter because this brush is very soft and the wall adheres really well and easily. Always remember to apply 2 coats and do not dilute it. To do the inside of this piece of furniture, a 125 milliliters should be enough because very little is used. I try to keep the edges very clean, so if I smudge with the cloth, I fix everything. Look, I remove any kind of stain or impurity, and the drawer will be beautiful, clean, fragrant, and colored. A nice contrast with the exterior color. Look, I will definitely apply a second coat, but the first one is already beautiful. Our bedside tables are drying now. You'll see the magic on the marble. We need to make it beautifully shiny by removing some impurities. So, we use very fine steel wool and jasmine oil. Look how beautiful it is. I come here, put a drop of oil on this part, and start rubbing. This will lead me to remove all impurities, to lighten it, to make it beautifully smooth, beautifully pure, perfect. But above all, even on marbles, perhaps lighter ones that have had issues, we remove the defects. It will also be water repellent and will keep dust away for quite some time. Look here where everything is dirty. Look at this spot as I carefully rub it. Look, it's all gone. Look here, you see, it gradually becomes bright, smooth, shiny, and polished, and I also remove all the impurities and imperfections, even here in this spot where it's extremely blackened. Look, it's shiny and I remove any kind of dirt, dust. Look carefully at this corner where there's a significant amount of buildup and residue, for example. It's absolutely perfect. Once I've finished going over all the marble, I use a cloth to remove any remaining issues, spots, and blemishes, so I can see if there are still areas where I need to go deeper with the oil treatment, and I'll be left with beautiful, shiny, and pristine marble without impurities and protected. I move on to the other.
An infallible method that still too few people adopt before protecting to achieve an ultra-smooth surface is to quickly run a smooth sponge over the surfaces.
There are different thicknesses, grains not thicknesses. It is the smooth surface sponge that is the thinnest. As you can see with a very fine grain, you should never press down when using it, unless you actually want to strip and reveal the underlying surface, but it should only be gently stroked. This leads to an extremely smooth surface, like velvet, and when you go to protect it with a clear protective or wax, you will feel velvet under your hands. This is how it's done. Pass the sponge, and that's all you do. You must not press down for any reason, and you will achieve a very smooth finish. This will give you a truly, truly velvety surface, like magic indeed. The important thing, however, is to first use a super wrung-out microfiber cloth. You'll see it's almost dry. This will remove the last traces of dust. You'll already see the magic under your hands because the surface is truly an incredible velvet, and the trick of tricks is that this very quick step will make the surface even more resistant to impacts and scratches over time.
You will have a perfect, complete coverage, a very smooth and velvety surface, and when you apply the protective layer, it will be really rigid, very strong, even for kitchens and doors.
It's time to protect our bedside table. Now look at the wood as it hydrates. What a beautiful shade it takes on. I use jasmine wax and a pointed brush. Watch out for the magic. Fantastic. It will be truly perfect to match the tone of the marbles. They are really strong, warm, and deep. We now apply jasmine wax over the entire surface, not only on the wood parts but also on the colored section, and we will then have a truly velvety surface. Here too, if you can, apply it with a crossed brush stroke, both vertically and horizontally. We also go over the white parts. Although they are not white, they are dark sand, a sand color, but here they almost seem white, next to the wood. Look at the drawer. Once the wax is applied on the wood, it hydrates the surface. It truly is beautiful. It was definitely worth it, every step. The paint removing and doing a very precise work, beautiful and simple. This restyling is also finished. We came to Davide's house to deliver 2 bedside tables, which in my opinion add a lot of warmth.
Yes, they look good.
Listen, you are, let's say, into contemporary art. What do you think about these lamps? These lamps are beautiful. They are very modern, they are very beautiful, they are new, but they can also reflect a certain style. Yes, absolutely. What are they inspired by?
I believe they are somewhat inspired by futurism and the simple forms of minimalism.
Nice. So do these two bedside tables look good underneath, with two lamps that can also be interpreted as minimal?
Yes, absolutely.
So always remember, when you have a very modern home, not every accessory, every piece of furniture, every decor item has to be the same. You can also add antique pieces, some old marbles with vintage knobs, and combine everything because, in reality, something old adds a lot of warmth. Do you agree? We show you how beautiful it is because there are Fornasetti wallpapers on the walls, which are very pretty, and in my opinion, this way, with an antique piece, all the rest of the finish, the resin on the floor, the modernity, the lightness, work very well. See you at the next restyling. Goodbye.